We are anonymous. No faces, no flags, no permission slips. We speak when power panics, when institutions are hijacked, and when silence is mistaken for consent. And right now, Donald Trump just got blindsided. Not by an election, not by a courtroom, not even by Congress. He got blindsided by something he cannot bully into submission. Mass resignations, mass cancellations, and a cultural exodus that turns his vanity project into an empty building with his name slapped on the front like a cheap sticker. Here is what is happening. About a dozen performers looked at Donald Trump and his phony board at the Kennedy Center, a board he seized, vandalized, and then used to unlawfully rebrand a national memorial as the Trump Kennedy Center. And those performers said, "We quit. We are not performing for this regime." And the public response has been just as loud. Attendance is down so much it is like nobody is even showing up to this propaganda-vandalized center that this Trump regime is trying to turn into a stage for loyalty tests instead of art. Now the latest order, the one that should make every donor, every board member, every political operative in that building feel the floor tilt under them. The Washington National Opera decided on Friday to move out of its longtime home at the Kennedy Center. They have been there since the 1970s, basically since the institution opened, and now they are saying goodbye. That is not a small protest. That is a foundational tenant packing up and leaving because the landlord turned the lobby into a billboard for himself. Reuters reported the opera said it would seek an early termination of its affiliation agreement and operate independently, pointing to changes at the center, collapsing box office revenue, and shattered donor confidence, while also citing a new business model that demands productions be fully funded in advance and cuts shared support services. The Kennedy Center spokesperson tried to spin it as a financially challenging relationship and even used the phrase financial stability and long-term future of the Trump Kennedy Center, like saying it out loud makes it legitimate. It does not. It just makes it sound like a hostage note, and it does not stop there. We have a list of at least 10 additional acts that have canceled at the Kennedy Center. Hamilton, the Broadway musical, of course. Chuck Red, the leader of the Kennedy Center's annual jazz jam on Christmas. The Cookers, the jazz supergroup, canceled a pair of shows. Stephen Schwartz, the Wicked composer, withdrew as host of the Washington National Opera Gala set for May 16th. Issa Rae, the Insecure star, canceled a sold-out March 16th, 2025 stop. Bela Fleck canceled a trio of concerts with the National Symphony Orchestra scheduled for February 2025. Rhiannon Giddens, the Grammy-winning musician, canceled the May 11th, 2025 concert at the Kennedy Center. Low Cut Connie, the Philadelphia Rockers, called off a February 2025 performance. Peter Wolf, Christy Lee, Doug Verone, Balloon, Amanda Room, and others. And earlier in the year, the resignations started hitting like a drumbeat that never stopped. Ben Folds stepped down immediately in February as an artistic advisor at the Kennedy Center. Shonda Rhimes resigned. Renee Fleming resigned. Others too. The point is not a single name. The point is the pattern. A mass refusal to be used as a decorative curtain for an authoritarian photo op. You remember Ben Folds? They interviewed him back in February when he resigned right away, the moment the Trump regime said they were changing the board and intervening with propaganda. He said, "I'm gone." He resigned from his role connected to the National Symphony Orchestra as Trump seized the center. His statement was simple and devastating, given the developments at the Kennedy Center. "Effective today, I'm resigning as advisor to the National Symphony Orchestra. Not for me." That interview, they said, went mega viral, over 2.5 million views. And then you heard the anger from ordinary people in Washington, D.C., watching a convicted felon, a thug, and a grifter treat a national cultural memorial like a personal golf course sign. One resident said it felt like democracy died today, like history was happening in real time, and we should all be shocked that a felon just stuck his name on top of a national monument, calling it a desecration. Then Jim Acosta showed up and said what needed to be said right to the camera. He called it the scene of yet another crime committed by Donald Trump, saying Trump vandalized the Kennedy Center by putting his name on it, and Trump needs to understand he cannot do this single-handedly. Only Congress can authorize a change of name to the Kennedy Center, but Trump does not care about the law. He does not care what is appropriate. He went and vandalized the John F. Kennedy Memorial Center for the Performing Arts, named after President Kennedy after he was assassinated, and Trump should show some respect for that. But of course he does not. And Acosta drew the line. We, the American people, are not going to call it the Trump Kennedy Center, just like we are not going to call the Department of Defense the Department of War. or the Gulf of Mexico, the Gulf of America. The sane, rational American people are not going to go along with childish, lawless branding games. Trump can act like a child. He can be a vandal. He can plaster his name everywhere. But it does not change what the rest of us do in response to a childish and lawless administration. And here is the deeper truth. Trump never learns, because narcissists do not learn. They only escalate. This is not about booking bans. It is about commandeering. It is about control. It is about propaganda. It is about taking an institution built as a memorial and turning it into an ego monument. Ben Folds put it in context with the clarity of someone who actually studies history, not someone who only studies applause. He said it was really sad. The Kennedy Center had great missions, and it is a memorial too, as close to sacred as you get in the federal government context. And he said it played out roughly the way it felt it would. He did not claim to predict every event, but he recognized the first step, an authoritarian first step. Not starting with late-night comedians, because that is harder at first. They thought they would run over artists first, because it is close to home, because they think the arts are easier to bully, easier to starve, easier to rebrand. Then he said the quiet part out loud. People misunderstand. It is not just Trump wandering in and wanting to book bans. It is commandeering the arts, and from there you move on to expression, to freedom of expression, and then to networks, and to Stephen Colbert and Jimmy Kimmel and 60 Minutes, and you just keep steamrolling. That is the logic. Take culture, then take speech, then take truth. Folds said he was sick on his stomach when he quit, because he knew they were going to run it into the ground, and he pointed out that many of the people being appointed had no experience in arts administration. But that was never the point. The point was to take it, run over it, and move on. That is why the building feels like rot. Not because art is weak, but because propaganda is sterile. It drains the life out of whatever it touches. And then he said something that should haunt every American who remembers what happens when dictators pose with landmarks. When Trump put his name on the place, Folds said it felt like spray painting your name on the side of it. He said it reminded him of that image of Hitler in front of the Eiffel Tower. Look what I have got. The building is not yours. The culture is not yours. The people are not yours. But the dictator wants the photo anyway. Then came the question about resignations and fear. What does it tell you when you see people quitting, when even organizations like the opera that have been there for 50 years are leaving? And what do you say to individuals who are uncomfortable but afraid, worried they will get sued by Rick Grinnell? Folds answered with empathy and realism. Everybody is in a different position. His friends in the National Symphony Orchestra are worried about jobs. They have varying views about how to handle it, but nobody is inspired by it. He said he was in a position to draw attention to what was happening, and as a curator he could not curate fairly and safely. He could not bring in an artist who might have different views than Rick Grinnell or Trump, because that is how political capture works. It narrows the stage until only loyalty survives. He even mentioned artists being booed, like Yasmin Williams, and he said people were paid to do it, whether it is true or not. The feeling is real, that the environment is being shaped, manipulated, turned into a pressure cooker. And that is what authoritarians do. They create a climate where artists self-censor, not because they agree, but because they fear consequences. Folds said he personally would not touch the place, while it is nuclear right now. He would not feel safe playing there. He would not think he is in good hands. He would not think people will show up. And then he delivered the most capitalist verdict imaginable. Let the market speak. How is the Kennedy Center doing? Oops, do not play there. That venue cannot draw crowds. That is what happens when you replace mission with ego. And while organizations have contracts, boards, obligations, the individuals working there are just people trying to make a living in the arts. They have to show up at work. They are trapped inside someone else's political fantasy. That is what makes this so ugly. Trump does not just damage buildings. He damages livelihoods. He drags ordinary workers into his culture war so he can pretend he is conquering something. Then he went deeper into why this is so poisonous. The Kennedy Center and the National Symphony Orchestra have a history tied to freedom. He reminded people that the orchestra existed before the building, and right now it is just trapped inside it. He talked about Rostropovich Slava and the history of artists fleeing repression. He talked about Shostakovich living under constant danger, friends arrested, tortured, killed, because the state wanted to control art. And he said that is the point in a free society. The dictator has no say over the arts. You leave that alone. That is for the people. When they want to take it over, it becomes propaganda. And that is what made him sick from the start. Now look at where we are, a year into this thing. beginning to mid-January 2026. Big No Kings protests, institutions bending, many breaking. And yet there is resiliency in the people. Folds said the responsibility and the right of artists is to express honestly, almost like reportage, almost like journalism. And he said do it now while we still can. Not at the Kennedy Center. Anywhere. Because you may not have the luxury if this keeps going the way it is going. Better to show up at the protest now than in a year, when you are worried about being jailed or killed. He said the artist's job has always been to be a little ahead of the curve, to explain what is coming in terms nobody else is allowed to, and it does not have to make perfect sense. It has to feel right, and that is what moves people. And then the final irony Trump cannot escape. The same political camp that spent years sneering that the arts do not matter, that funding does not matter, that culture is disposable, sure moved fast when it came to the Kennedy Center. They took it over like it mattered, because it does, because art creates belonging, because culture creates memory, because a free stage is a threat to fragile power. Folds mentioned he is playing other venues, giving people hope, including being part of the Grant Park Music Festival lineup in Chicago. And he made a request that matters. Support the National Symphony Orchestra when they play at places like Wolf Trap and other venues. The National Symphony Orchestra is not the Kennedy Center. There are some of the finest musicians in the country, and they are being held hostage inside a building with someone's name spray-painted on the outside. No one shows up to their shows anymore. That is the tragedy. The artists did not do this. Trump did. So here is the real headline, even if Trump refuses to read it. He tried to seize a memorial. He tried to rebrand history. He tried to turn a national performing arts center into a personal shrine, and instead he triggered an exodus, a wave of resignations, a wave of cancellations, a vote of no confidence from the people who actually create culture. Trump wanted applause. He got silence. He wanted legitimacy. He got lawsuits and public contempt. He wanted power. He got artists walking away, donors closing wallets, audiences staying home, and institutions refusing to play along. And now, you decide what happens next. Do not look away. Do not normalize it. Do not let a convicted felon, who treats law like a joke, treat national culture like a souvenir. Support the artists who refuse. Support the venues that stay independent. Support the musicians, who are trying to keep dignity alive outside the hostage building. Show up where art is still free. Speak up where power demands quiet. And if you are watching this, do one thing right now. Share this. Talk about it. Bring receipts into the daylight, because authoritarians survive on people feeling alone. You are not alone. We are anonymous, and we are only getting started.